Once last summer and once this summer, I was challenged to finish a race. Well, a walk, really. Last summer it was a 14-mile walk, and this summer it was a 10-mile walk. Now, it wasn't the distance that was the problem. I could walk 15 miles. I won't say without challenge, but I can do it. I can walk 15 miles. So it wasn't the distance. It wasn't that it was too hot. It wasn't that I didn't have enough water or that I didn't have enough little snacks to keep me going. Instead, it was something quite small and quite delicate, but very powerful, that caused me to be challenged to finish those walks. Blisters. Both times the blisters were on the same foot. And I have to tell you, and you'll think, oh, this is an overstatement, but I'll have to tell you that the last 2 miles each time were torture. Torture. And I even got new shoes after the first time it happened. I'm not too happy about that, because you know how much good running shoes cost. Well, I had to finish. I didn't have any choice. Even if I had called someone, there would have been no place on the trail where they could have picked me up. So I had to keep going. It sort of reminds me of what happens if you go to the Grand Canyon. I don't know if any of you have gone to the Grand Canyon, but if you have, and you hear any of the little lectures that the rangers give, what they say is how you go into the canyon is how you're coming out of the canyon, unless you're near death. So if you walk in, you're going to walk out. And I can tell you, having gone about halfway into the canyon, that walking in is a picnic. Walking out is, I can't even tell you how hard it is. Well, it was like that. I had to keep going. I didn't have a choice. And so every step I tried to think of as a step closer to the goal. And I had to listen to the encouragement of my walking partner, and I had to look for signs on the trail. Do you ever notice that trail and trial have exactly the same letters? I think there's a reason for that. I had to look for signs on the trail that it would soon be over. Because the only way to get to my car was to keep going, even though it was a trial on the trail. Well, life is like that. The writer of the book of Hebrews, from which we read, knew that. You may remember that last week we said that this letter was written to Jewish Christians who were being persecuted because of their faith in Jesus. And so in the letter they are being encouraged to endure by having faith. And so they are being encouraged to build their faith. And so the writer gives them a definition for faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Well, that sounded good, it seems, but wasn't all that tangible. And so the writer then begins what we now call the Hall of Fame of Faithfulness, listing all of these examples of people who were faithful, so that the reader could say, oh, that's what it looks like to be faithful. And so, as you noted in today's lesson, we have just a little bit of it like this. For time would fail me to tell you of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouth of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Now, the writer of Hebrews knew that the Jewish Christians reading this would know who all of these people were and would know their stories. So he doesn't go into detail. But the point is this: for all of the saints of the past, as well as those who would become saints or examples of faithfulness in the future, two things are true. God is stirring up in people's lives the faith that they need to endure. And as they draw on that faith, the end result will be joy. And so he says, persevere. And of course his encouragement goes something like this: since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside the weight and the sin that clings so closely and run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. There's a pastor named Charles Reed who says that what's being described here is like a big coliseum or a stadium. And the image is sort of the Olympics and of people running into the coliseum. So imagine this. We'll pick on Peter here. Let's pick on Peter. You don't have to stand up, Peter. You can sit there and be humiliated as well as stand there. Okay, here's Peter. Peter runs into the stadium. And all of a sudden he realizes that the stadium is full of the saints of the past and living saints, and they're all cheering for him. And they're saying, go, 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 go. And Peter hears this, and he looks up, and there's the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul has a big sign that says, Peter! And then he sees Abraham and Moses, and Abraham and Moses are high-fiving, and they're chanting, Peter, 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 Peter. Well, of course, Peter gets goosebumps, and he looks around, and he thinks, I can do this, and he kicks it up a notch. And he keeps running. But he's not prepared for what's around the corner, because as he comes around the corner, there's Jesus at the finish line, and Jesus is looking intent and encouraging, and Jesus says, come on, Peter, you can do it. Keep going. Come on, Peter. So Peter stretches, and he goes across the finish line, and he falls in the arms of Jesus, and Jesus gives him a hug and says, oh, great job, Peter. I knew you could do it. Great image, huh? Not just for Peter, but for all of us. And not just when we're talking about the end of life, but throughout life. Whenever we face a challenge, if we could just have that kind of image of being cheered on by the saints past and present, and Jesus waiting for us at the end saying, you can do it, you can do it. I mean, what a great vision. As I was thinking about that this week, I was thinking, boy, Bishop Elizabeth Eaton needs to keep that vision in mind. She has a road that's set out before her that's going to be a challenge to run. For those of you who do not know, Bishop Elizabeth Eaton is the bishop of the Northeastern Ohio Synod, and this week she was elected as presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Now, if you're a visitor and you're going, huh? What does that mean? It means that instead of being in charge of the ELCA churches in Northeastern Ohio, she's going to be in charge of the ELCA churches in the entire United States. And this was a surprise of the Holy Spirit. By all reports, everyone went to the church, the various voting members, of which there was a delegation from each synod, went to the church-wide assembly in Pittsburgh, thinking that the current presiding bishop, Mark Hansen, would be elected for a third term. So because he was willing to serve, there hadn't been next presiding bishop. They got there. It was an ecclesiastical ballot, which means that any name of any ordained person can be written down on the first ballot. And so Bishop Eaton's was among those names. And at that point, she and two other women who are bishops had a little conference and discussed whether or not they would remove their names from the ballot. The only time you can remove your name in an ecclesiastical ballot is after the first ballot. So they decided, for the sake of getting the conversation going for future years of the idea of having a woman presiding bishop, that they would leave their names on the ballot. And so it was that as soon as Bishop Eaton spoke, as soon as she answered questions, her name began to move up. And she was elected by a wide margin on the 5th ballot. Completely surprised that this happened. Now, I would say that it was the movement of the Holy Spirit, as well, within, I would say, the fact that she is a person that has great wit. She's very straightforward. When she was asked to speak at the assembly, she spoke about the need to maintain our distinct Lutheran theology and yet to move beyond our traditional roots and to embrace change. She spoke about the need to heal divisions in the church, and that one of the ways to do that is to realize that if Lutherans see agreeing to disagree as a viable way of doing things. It was all of that that I think, along with the Holy Spirit's movement, led to her election as our next presiding bishop. But I have to tell you that as this was unfolding on Wednesday, Pastor Carolyn and I and the others who were around that day were just shaking our heads in amazement. This is sort of a little sideline to that. I was thinking about that this morning in the early service as I was watching Chloe Weidrich light the candles. She was the acolyte this morning. And I thought to myself, you know, when I was Chloe's age, I wasn't allowed to be an acolyte. Now, I tell the confirmation class that, and they go, why? Were you too clumsy? They didn't want you around fire? No, it's because I was a girl. And I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that old. I mean, we just were shaking our heads in amazement. On the one hand, and we had mixed feelings. On the one hand, we are proud of Bishop Eaton, feel that she's called, feel that she'll be a gift to the church, feel that this was the movement of the Spirit. On the other hand, at least I can say I was so impressed with Bishop Hansen and his visionary leadership and his straightforwardness and his pastoral attitude that I felt sympathy for him, because unknown to him, his entire life, what he thought was going to be happening next was changed. So on the one hand, I felt all that, along with sadness to lose Bishop Eaton as our synod bishop. But then on the other hand, I thought, can you believe that the Holy Spirit was at work in that way? And if I had mixed feelings, can you imagine what it's like for Bishop Eaton and her husband, Conrad Selnick, who's an Episcopal priest? I mean, it must feel like they're standing on this road and it stretches out in front of them. They have to run this race and they haven't trained for it. Of course, she has, but it probably feels like they haven't. And I thought to myself, you know, in a way, maybe that's good. Because what it means is that she will have to rely on her faith. She will have to listen to the cheers of the faithful around her. She'll have to keep her eyes focused on Jesus and realize that she cannot do it alone. And indeed, that's true for all of us. For the saints of the past, it was true. For the saints, the faithful of the present, and for those of the future. We can't do it alone. You know, all those people that were listed in that particular passage had something in common with each other and with all of us. They weren't perfect when it came to having faith, and they weren't perfect when it came to living out their faith. In fact, as I said last week, their doubt and their mistakes were indeed elements of their faith. And yet, why are they named in the Hall of Fame of Faithfulness? It's because they realized that they had to trust in God, not in their own faith, but they knew that God is faithful. And just look at what they endured. I mean, I said in the earlier service, this is a PG-rated reading here. Let's see, where's this part? They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, to whom the world was not worthy. Now, if they could endure all that, then I would think that we can endure whatever comes in our path, both as individuals and as a church. During the next month, our congregation is going to be making some decisions. We've been called to get in the race. So we got to lace up our shoes. I don't know if I'm going to wear the ones I wore on that walk, though. These are much better. Brace up my shoes. We have to take a deep breath. We have to realize it's going to take energy and effort. And then we got to run. But here's the deal, folks. We can't look at our own feet. We can't look at each other. We can't even look at the finish line if the finish line represents what we want to see happen. The only place for us to look as we run this race is at Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And to realize that God is faithful, but God also is full of surprises.